Hello and welcome to the World Today. I'm Anne Mwawadu. Thanks a lot for joining us. At least 9 people have now been confirmed dead as a result of the Russian drone attack in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Ukraine State Emergency Service said in the statement that it had completed rescue and recovery efforts after recovering 9 bodies from the destroyed building. On Tuesday, a wave of Russian attacks with Iran-made shade drones with a residential building in the town about 50 miles southeast of the capital. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has visited the southern region of Kherson, where he toured local infrastructure, promising to restore everything following Russia's invasion. The Ukrainian counteroffensive last year pushed Russian troops out of the regional capital Kherson after months of occupation. Workers in that region are now busy restoring power and water supply. The president says that he will have to ensure full restoration and protection of the energy sector. He expressed gratitude to the workers who restored power to the people of Ukraine following the shutdown. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian president also met with troops in the front line, giving awards to servicemen. In his usual nightly address, the president said that it is painful to look at cities in the Donetsk region to which Russia has brought such terrible suffering, adding that Ukraine will respond to these attacks. Ukrainian forces have held out for about 8 months in Bakhmut, despite taking heavy casualties in one of the bloodiest battles since Russia's full-scale invasion 13 months ago.
Today I've been working in the regions all day. Donbass, the front line, our soldiers, the region, then Kharkiv region. The situation in Kharkiv on the border, in all districts of the region, recovery, defense of critical infrastructure. I started from the front, from the Bakhmut region. It is an honor for me to support our soldiers who are defending the country in the toughest frontline conditions. I presented state awards, thanked our soldiers for their bravery, for their resilience for Ukraine, which we are protecting thanks to such heroes, thanks to each and everyone who is fighting against the Russian evil. It is painful to look at the cities of Donbass, to which Russia has brought such terrible suffering. The ruin, the almost constant hourly air raid siren in Kramatorsk, the constant threat of shelling, the constant threat to life. It is there in Donbass and Kharkiv region, wherever the Russian evil has come, that it is obvious that a terrorist state cannot be stopped by anything else but our victory, and we will ensure it, the Ukrainian victory. In all areas of the east of our country, where there's a Ukrainian flag, there is hope. You can feel it. We will do everything we can to ensure that the blue and yellow colors continue their liberation movement to return normal life to our entire land. From Donetsk to the border, we will definitely respond to the occupier for every attack on our cities. Today's Russian strikes on Zaporizhzhia, the night attack on Kyiv region, all Russian attacks will get a military, political, and legal response.
Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev says the West dislikes Russia and China's independence, and the coming decades will not be quiet as it will try to break Russia up into smaller and weaker states. In an interview with Russian journalists, Mr. Medvedev said that Ukraine was part of the greater Russia and added that he saw no prospects for reviewing Russia's ties with the West in the near future. He also is the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council. He said in a bid by the country to arrest President Vladimir Putin on a warrant issued by the International Criminal Court, it will be taken as a declaration of war. He also said the threats of the nuclear conflict is growing and the nuclear parity with the United States and their allies and even Russia's superiority guarantees its integrity, although West strives to break the country up. In other developments now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Britain's decision to supply depleted uranium shells to Ukraine takes the situation to new and dangerous levels. Earlier, President Vladimir Putin condemned British plans to send tank ammunition that contains depleted uranium to Ukraine, saying that Moscow will be forced to respond accordingly. According to Russia's defense ministry, there are fewer and fewer steps left before a potential nuclear collision between Russia and the West. Britain's Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, said on Wednesday that there was no nuclear escalation in Ukraine war, speaking after Putin's condemnation of that plan. In the meantime, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has announced plans to modernize anti-missile defense systems in the capital, Moscow. And that's after a series of Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian territory. Several air defense systems have appeared on rooftops around Moscow this year. And according to Shoigu, developing the air defense weapons is one of the priorities for the army. He also adds that the army will also form an air defense division brigade that will be trained and equipped with new generation S-350 air-to-ground missile systems. He did not say if these are new plans or even if they are related to the conflict in Ukraine. Drone attacks on Russian territory and on Moscow-annexed Crimea have all increased in recent months, more than 1 year into the Kremlin's Ukraine offensive. Russia says the modernization of Moscow's air defense system will be completed this year, and Russian officials have blamed Kyiv for a string of drone attacks deep inside Russian territory since the beginning of the military campaign in Ukraine. Now, the White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said that he believes attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines were acts of sabotage. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines connecting Russia and Germany under the Baltic Sea were hit by a series of unexplained explosions last September, and Moscow called it an act of international terrorism. The United States strongly denies any involvement in the Nord Stream blasts.
National investigations being done into the Nord Stream 2 explosion by 3 of our allies. We are not going to get ahead of that. That work is still ongoing. We still do believe it was an act of sabotage. The United States was not involved in any way, contrary to some press reporting out there. But we need to let the work of these investigators go on, and it needs to go on unimpeded and without any influence or pressure from anybody else. Okay. And we're going to continue to monitor the situation as it develops. Remember, you got 3. You keep saying it. There's 3, and each of them are being conducted independently by 3 different nations, and I think we need to let them finish their work. I don't know of any timeline. You'd have to go to their national investigative bodies to find out.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, on the other hand, said that he did not expect that the findings of investigation into who was responsible for last year's blasts on the Nord Stream gas pipelines will be made public. Denmark, Germany, and Sweden have all conducted their own investigations into the blasts. Swedish and other European investigators say the attacks were carried out on purpose, but they have not said who they think was responsible for it. Moscow, without providing evidence, has blamed the explosion on Western sabotage. Polish and Dutch fighter jets pilots participated in a joint exercise from the northern Polish city of Malbork. The city's airbase is currently hosting Dutch F-35 jets, which have been stationed in Poland since February this year. Polish IMIG-29S and Dutch F-35S all executed on air interceptions maneuvers over Polish airspace to showcase air deterrence on NATO's eastern flank. They also took up from the same airbase from which Dutch F-35 fighter jets departed to intercept a formation of 3 Russian military aircrafts near Poland and escorted them out last February.
We are sending, as General said, a very strong message. So as the Polish Air Force, we don't feel that we are alone. That's so important for whole Poland, for East flank, Baltic countries, Romania, Bulgaria, everybody who is at the edge of that conflict.
Since we've been here, we've had 4 alpha scrambles, is what they're called. So an alpha scramble means that you are priority 1. So you are scrambled in a quick manner, and that is to intercept aircraft that are approaching NATO airspace. We've had that happen 4 times, all of them in February since we've been here.
Norwegian armed forces have announced that 8 German-made Leopard 2 battle tanks, which Norway pledged to Ukraine, have now been received by Kyiv. Footage released by the Norwegian military shows a Leopard 2A4 tank being transported by road to an undisclosed location and an undisclosed date before being loaded onto an Antonov transport plane, along with munitions and an armored support vehicle. The tanks were promised in late January, along with 4 special-purpose tanks from its armored engineering and bridge layer category, based on what Ukraine says it needed the most. Kyiv has secured from several of its Western allies pledged to send modern battlefield tanks to help end off Russia and fend off Russia's invasion, as Moscow now steps up efforts to make advances in eastern Ukraine. China is trying to put some action into a peace plan, and that's according to Henry Wang, who is a scholar from the Center for China and Globalization regarding President Xi Jinping's visit to Russia. The Chinese president met with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Monday, seeking both to deepen economic ties with an ally he sees as a useful counterweight to the West and to promote Beijing's role as a potential peacemaker in Ukraine. Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin emerged from 2 days of talks with warm words of friendship between China and Russia and joint criticism of the West, but no sign of a diplomatic breakthrough over Ukraine.
One of the, as the foreign ministry spokesperson said, it's a peace mission, trying to find out what is the thinking that Russia has, and China has just not too long ago, proposed the 12-point of a peace plan. And also before President Xi's visit, China Foreign Minister Qin Gang actually phoned and talked to the Ukraine foreign minister. So I think China is trying to, put some action into this peace plan and talk to both sides. And certainly, President Xi's visit to Putin, I really regard that as very timely, and also find out what Russians are thinking. And but at the same time, trying to also put the two countries' relation on a more stable. I don't think they are saying that again this time. That was a year ago, when the war before the war broke out, when they had. But China is saying that many countries, our friendship is unlimited, our cooperation is boundless, everlasting or unlimited, or sky's the limit. So that's China says that all the time to many countries. It's not just Russians singled out to say that. So, which is in a way, but China also said, the relationship with Russia is there's no alliance, first of all. Second, is not aimed at any third parties. And thirdly, they don't want to see a conflict, anywhere else. So that's very clear. So that's just a matter of between China and Russia in a normal neighbor cooperation.
Let's bring in security and global affairs analyst Confidence Machari, who joins us now on this program. Thank you very much for joining us on The World Today.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Yes, I can hear you. Thanks for joining us. Now, let's begin with that visit by Mr. Xi to Russia. What's the significance of that visit at this time in this conflict?
Yeah, in the first place, it gives both countries the feeling that the Western solution of Russia is not really working as planned. And apart from that, the Chinese foreign policy in this day and age is departing from the COVID foreign policy of wolf warrior diplomacy, in which the PRC and the CCP itself needed to push back on allegations that China deliberately let out the virus into the world. And then it used its own diplomats to push heavily against criticism. So President Xi, having secured the third 10 years that Chinese president is trying to pivot away from that into a foreign policy of peace and cooperation. So just a week before the announcement that China is going to launch another peace plan for Ukraine, it just so happened that the diplomats from Iran and Saudi Arabia were huddled in China's capital for like a week, where they under detailed proposals for a normalization of relations, which has been fraught since 2016, when both countries decided to rupture diplomatic relations over the killing of a Shia priest in Saudi Arabia. So what it simply means in the first place is that Russia is not isolated as many people would like. It has friends even in high places as high as China. It is able to command attention in the third world, owing to the recently concluded Russia-Africa summit. And even at that, it also has a willing center of power in the east, which of course can be used as a buffer and as a counter to Western hegemony, which both Beijing and Moscow actually think that is not simply needed in a multipolar and a multicultural century like we have in 2023.
Well, there's been fears about west of China planning to supply weapons to Russia. How likely do you think this will happen, and what implication will it have on this war if it does happen?
I think in the first place, we need to, first of all, get it in the context of the peace proposal that President Xi has said he has for Ukraine. I don't think that if the Ukrainians do not accept it, which they are likely to do rather, because of Western pressure, I do think that that's where we should now start talking about material Chinese support for Russia. Of course, Russia has not actually come out to say publicly that they are soliciting for hardware help from China. And China has not done more than go beyond provision of helmets, boots, and every other soft material aid for Russia in its war in Ukraine. So for now, what China is trying to do basically is to get as much compromise between both capitals as possible, because its strategic goals right now is to be seen as a global peacemaker, as a force to be reckoned with. So I don't think on the interim it's like to jeopardize its chances of having that by openly arming a Russian side, even though an off-the-cuff conversation between Putin and Xi actually indicated that both of them are looking at even closer cooperation at an even more personal level that will extend to both their countries. But I just think that any sort of support, military support, hardware support for Russia would come in the later stages if the war, as currently being prosecuted, is escalated beyond its current measure to the use of nuclear weapons and all of that. In the first place, I do not think that China would want to be caught in the act of supplying a nuclear escalator like Russia if Russia tries to use nuclear weapons or dirty bombs in Ukraine. But on the other hand, if it gets beyond those points where nuclear weapons are not involved, then the old Chinese component of trying to get peace is simply not working, and then China is also isolated very much more in the world. We are going to have to see much more closer to Russian cooperation as regards this conflict.
Exactly. Although the United States has said otherwise, we know that China presents itself as neutral in the Ukraine war. Even when Xi visited Putin, he didn't say anything concrete about ending the war in Ukraine. Do you think that China can act as a mediator and broker peace between Russia and Ukraine?
At this point, I do not actually think that even a dissenting party to such a peace deal has much choice. Zelensky, for instance, is one of the key actors in such a potential peace deal. And Zelensky for himself has not really said anything against or in opposition to a potential Chinese peace plan. What he simply has done is that the first plan that was floated, he rejected it because it was too much in support of Russia. And then he didn't put away the thought of Chinese intervention in peacemaking process altogether. He didn't repudiate the plan. What he simply has kept open is the chance that Ukraine actually has the leverage and has been seeking to talk to President Xi of China to use his influence to stop the war. So the frustration in Kyiv right now is that Xi has not really been able to do it. And even at that, Ukraine is simply not letting up, and he's also trying to get President Xi on the phone to talk to Putin. And so what I would suggest, or what I do think from this kind of an open invitation, is that in the coming days, if the Chinese government is able to get a peace plan that is not overly in support of Russia, but also talks about a ceasefire in a way that's kind of it helps both sides, because one of the key contentious issues to peace, or the key obstacles to peace, is the unilateral ceasefire in this conflict. Because on one hand, the Russians are trying to get a ceasefire for Christmas, on the other hand, the Ukrainians are not accepting it and all of that. So if the Chinese government is able to get a favorable peace plan that is both acceptable to Russia and Ukraine. I think it's one of the first steps. Yes, in every mediation, there is always the neutrality of the arbiter, but in this context, I don't really think that it has mattered that much, because even at the cost of other conflicts, like the Tigrayan conflict, for instance, the US was not really a neutral arbiter. It was very much more in support of Tigray, but at the end, it was still able to get both parties with the support of the African Union. So I think international mediation is moving away from that point where you have to be an impartial arbiter to a point where even vested interests will be able to get warring parties in a room and get them to amend and to make peace with each other.
Confidence, before I let you go, what do you make of the arrest warrant issued for President Vladimir Putin by the ICC?
And I will tell you why. Theoretically, it's not possible for that kind of a thing to make anything more than a symbolic action. Yes, of course, there have been reports and allegations of Russian war crimes in places like Bakhmut, Bucha rather, and the rest of that. But here's the thing: let's not kid ourselves. Putin is not going to be arrested. The question is, who is going to arrest him? It's certainly nobody. And I say this with utter certainty because one of the first African heads of state that was issued an arrest warrant by the ICC was Omar al-Bashir of Sudan. And even though many countries are not parties to the Rome Statute that established the ICC in 2002, but we are obligated to turn him in following his arrest warrant, they never did so for 19 years. While Bashir, following his support for the Janjaweeds in the Darfur crisis, was also gallivanting about flying around to different countries in the world. So I don't think that if the world was not able to get Omar Bashir to ICC justice when he was in office for a third world country like Sudan, I don't actually think that it's going to matter much to the Russians. And the results are there. The results are glaring. A few hours after the warrant notice for Putin's arrest was issued, you could hear the US president. He was quite elated with that particular notice, but it stopped short of the clearance of court. And you could understand why. When the ICC ordered Fatou Bensouda as chief prosecutor tried to get American soldiers that were accused of war crimes in Afghanistan to face the ICC, the United States slapped heavy sanctions on the court, even to the point that the ICC chief prosecutor was banned from entering the United States. And even in the recent months where conversations about Russian war crimes have been heightened in the US, the Biden White House tried to see if this kind of cases that have been documented can be well publicized. The US Department of Defense kicked against it, and simply because they knew that if this kind of cases go out to the public, it's going to affect the US record in not just Afghanistan, but also in Iraq. So the United States will not even put that kind of a thing way for that. I don't even think that there's any other third world country or any third country in the world rather that wants to arrest Putin or hand him over to the ICC. So it's just so simply as symbolic as it comes.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Confidence Bakari. Thanks a lot for your time. Security and global affairs analyst, thank you for your time on The World Today.
Thank you for having me.